Thank you for joining us this morning for our SACS Web System kickoff webinar. My name is Christine Davis. I'm the administrator in the School of Fiscal Services Division, Office of Financial Accountability and Information Services. Our office oversees the development of the existing legacy SACS software, and obviously that means that we've embarked on this journey to develop the new SACS web-based system. And presenting with me this morning is Tammy Montero. She works for the Fiscal Crisis and Management Assistant team. She is the subject matter expert assigned to the project by our contractor, who is also FICMAT and the CSIS. So again, we appreciate everybody who's joined the webinar this morning. I just wanted to mention that we've got a 2-hour webinar. We've got a lot to talk about this morning. We do have the Q&A enabled, so you'll be able to enter your questions. We will most likely wait until the end of the webinar, and time allowing, we will do our best to address questions that have come in through the chat. But just because of the high volume of participants in this webinar, that we unfortunately aren't going to have enough time to, I'm sure, address all the questions that are going to come in, but we do plan to take the Q&A and work on a Q&A list for after the presentation. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started with the session objectives. What we're going to go over today, first of all, what is the web-based SACS financial reporting system? What is the background on it and information about the release? We will go over what is not changing with the new system. Obviously, transitioning to a new system can be a little intimidating, but a lot of the key functionality that exists in our current legacy software is not changing, so that should ease any worries about going in and using this new system. We will go over the new system components and functionality, as well as its compatibility with operating systems and browsers. So obviously going into a web-based system, even though the core functionality of the SACS reporting remains the same, in a web environment, we did have to implement some new functionality to make sure that the system worked at an optimal level for the users. And that also includes the implementation of user roles, a dataset concept, and also workflow states. So we will be going over that today. We will also talk about applying and managing user roles. Again, one of the big new features of the system is having to actually have a user account and log in, and users will be assigned user roles, and that's going to be getting that set up in the beginning is going to be key to using the functionality in the system. We'll also go over understanding states in the dataset workflow. And then finally, which Tammy will do a system demonstration. Tammy's really good at maneuvering around the system, so we'll have Tammy do that presentation for us. Okay, so going right into the background on the system. So I'm hoping that everybody on this webinar is familiar with our current SACS financial reporting software. But in case you're pretty new and you haven't had a lot of exposure, in a nutshell, our SACS financial reporting system facilitates the preparation of your budget, interim, and unaudited actuals reporting period data and reports. Those reports that are submitted to oversight entities and the CDE. So we take your financial data from your financial systems, and the SACS software does do all, you prepare your fiscal oversight reports like criterion standards and your multi-year projections, as well as compliance reports such as maintenance of effort and calculation of your indirect cost rates. So in a nutshell, that's what we're doing here in the SACS system. I do want to note that some of you or many of you may also be familiar with another web-based system that was recently released by Department of Education in our Fiscal Services Division, and that's the Principal Apportionment Data Collection application. They've already gone live with that. They started that last fall, but I want to make clear that this is not the same application. And we're setting up this application. Some of the aspects of setting up users and working through the system might be a little bit different than the PADC system, but I just wanted to let you know that, so because we could foresee there might be a little bit of, confusion about, we've got the PADC system out there, and now we're talking about the SACS system. So we've been very busy getting our new web-based systems up and going, but I did want to mention that that difference. So why are we implementing a new system? The existing legacy system, and I don't know how many of you on this webinar have been around school business this long, but our existing system is almost 25 years old. So obviously after 25 years, it's well past its prime. It's built on unsupported and obsolete technologies that, while my staff have been doing an excellent job keeping the system going, every year that we do that, we are at an increased risk of a system failure, just because those unsupported technologies get more difficult to support. So we actually embarked on the whole process of implementing a new system back in 2006. So this has been a long road, a labor of love among all involved, but it's definitely, we're at the point that we need to get this new system off the ground and get it implemented. So that's where we're at, because we want to make sure that we can continue to provide the financial reporting functionality to our LEA users. So with this system, one of the really great things it's going to do is it's going to consolidate 4 components of our existing SACS system into separate activities, but yet within the one web-based application. So we have the SACS desktop software, which most of you are familiar with. That's the one that you download from our website. We have another separate system we call SACS maintenance, and that is the application where we generate the valid code combination tables. Another component of the existing system is what we call e-transfer, which is basically how you submit your unaudited actuals data files to CDE every year. That is a totally separate application outside of the software. And finally, the charter school alternative form. Again, that is a separate, that form is accessed separately by the charter schools that do use it. It's accessed on a separate website, and it's a standalone Excel-based file. That is also going to be, so all of those components are going to be integrated into one web-based system, which we think is going to be make our lives a lot easier, and hopefully make your lives easier as well. So for the release itself, we're anticipating a release date on or around April 5th, 2022. So that's coming up here pretty quickly. It's sneaking up on us. We have been working really diligently to get the web system ready for our LEA users. And so this is where we're anticipating this April 5th release. We will, that system will open up with your 2022-23 budget period reporting functionality. And then following will be 2022-23 interim and unaudited actuals period functionality. We will be doing that in subsequent releases, and the timing of that will coincide your being, with those reporting periods, kind of like what we do currently, although we have 2 releases of the current SACS software app, desktop software. And we typically release the budget software at the end of April, and then the all software at the end of June. So it's a similar concept here with releases for this new system. Again, they will coincide with those 2022-23 interim and UA period timelines. Another important note is that LEAs will prepare their 2021-22 unaudited actuals submissions with the legacy systems. So we are on top of developing the new on top of developing the new web system, we are also in the process of developing our existing desktop application. So probably sometime in June, using the normal release process, we will publish a SACS 2022 all desktop software application for you to prepare your 2021-22 SACS unaudited actuals files. And we will also be publishing the 2021-22 charter school alternative form using the same access that you do right now. Again, on our website, it's a separate, you prepare a separate Excel-based file. So again, I just wanted to make sure everyone understands that their 21-22 unaudited actuals will be prepared using the legacy systems. Okay, so now I'm going to go into what is not changing with the current software, with the new system. First of all, the SACS code structure. So these are, and addressed here are some common questions we received when we first started talking about the new web-based system. We haven't had a lot of additional questions. These seem to be the common concerns when people think about this new system being implemented. So first of all, the SACS code structure itself, we have I think 7-field SACS code structure. We are not adding or removing any of the fields. It's still fund, resource, project year, goal, function, object. Nothing with that is changing at all. And second of all, the data file structure. So the way you export a data file from your financial system that is ready for import into the current SACS software, that data file structure is not changing. The import and export file specs remain exactly the same. Forms within the web system. So we think about, when you go into your current SACS software, we have our, you have all your fund forms, you have your supplemental forms, your components of ending fund balance, your criterion standards. All of those forms are going to have the same content and overall functionality. Obviously, with a web-based system as opposed to a desktop application, the look of those forms is going to be different in the web-based system. We're bringing some of the user friendliness and the appealing to the eyes kind of functionality, or just the way you're looking at the system. It's it'll be a little more pleasing to the eyes than the current SACS software, which is pretty much black and white. But overall content and the way you maneuver around the forms, the way you enter data into the form cells, that is being retained as closely as possible. Again, because we're in a web-based environment now, we may have had to tweak a few little cells or little pieces here and there, again, to fit the web-based platform. But again, just want to assure you that all the forms remain basically the same. Then the paper and pen certification. So we haven't really talked about this much in some of our prior outreach sessions, but I just wanted to make clear that even though we're in a web-based environment, that the certification forms that you complete for each of your submissions, so for example, your budget certifications, your interim certification, and your unaudited certification, because those do go to, you do take those files to your governing boards for approval. We are continuing with the certification forms to have, or for you to obtain a wet signature. We, just like we do now, those certifications will be retained by the oversight entities and the LEAs, just with the same process you do right now. But we have not implemented an electronic certification per se, in terms of those again, the budget, interim, and UA certifications that you take to your governing board and have approved. Those will still be paper and pen. And not electronic certifications or electronic signatures. And then the charter school alternative form. So the charter school alternative form, this has come up a little more lately. The charter school alternative form retains the same content and overall functionality as it does right now. Because we are going to be in a web-based environment, and have available to us the ability to implement some technical checks like we do with the SACS reporting. We do plan to add technical checks, and those are basically going to replace some of the, I think there's some kind of checks that are currently performed on the standalone Excel-based file. But other than that, you're going to enter the same information. We are not requiring charter schools to use the SACS format. That has been a huge question with going to this web-based environment. It is called the SACS Web System, but that doesn't mean that all of the entities have to use SACS. Obviously, charter schools are able to report their unaudited actuals using the alternative format, and you will continue to do that. It's just that form will be in the SACS web-based environment. So that is the biggest change, is that it's going to be integrated into the web system. So now that we've discussed what's not changing, like I mentioned previously, with a web-based environment, obviously there are going to be some things that are new for our users. That includes the user roles and security features, which would mean, a user account. We've implemented basically two areas within the system where users will work, and that will be the draft, a draft user area versus a submission area, and we'll go over that. We did implement a nice tool within the web system, the single string validation tool. I believe Tammy will go over that when she demonstrates the system. This is a nice one-stop place for you as users to enter an entire SACS string and make sure that your string that you want to use is valid. So instead of having to go to the various combination tables that are only two-dimensional, the string validation tool will allow you to enter the entire string, and it will tell you exactly which code combination, you might have violated. So that's a pretty cool feature we've built in. Multi-user dataset access and form locking. So here, again, we're in a web environment with an existing system. You're basically, the software is downloaded on individual computers, individual workstations. But because we'll be in a web environment, this enables multiple users to be working on one submission at the same time, but obviously there are concerns when you're working in the same file at the same time. And so we've implemented a form locking functionality as well that helps prevent, double entering into forms, but we'll go over that a little bit later in the demonstration as well. Like I said before, the charter alternative form is included in the web-based system or integrated into the web-based system. Again, the functionality of the form itself is not changing, but it will be part of the system. And then finally, in terms of system compatibility, SACS Web is built on using the Google Chrome browser. Note that the web system has not been built based on a multi-browser platform, meaning we've only tested it and it's only been developed using Google Chrome. So although you might be able to operate or use the web system in another browser, that functionality has not been tested, and so we cannot guarantee how the system would operate should you try to use the system in another browser. So again, Google Chrome is the browser that you should be using for the web-based system. Okay, so we're going to go on to SACS entity levels and roles. So we talked earlier a little bit about the user roles and security. With this web-based system, we do have a user-based environment. So the entities that will have been assumed for the system are public user, charter school, school district, county office, California Department of Education, State Board of Education, and Joint Powers Authority. Those are all the entities that are expected to access the system. This public user is a new concept. We won't go over this a lot today, but basically a public user, once there is data published in the system, which when we go live, there won't be any data available for a public user to look at, but basically that entity was developed in order to allow interested parties outside of our LEA universe to have access to the system to be able to read only financial data that is published by LEA. So we all know that the SACS data is public information, and this public user entity or public user entity and role was developed to help facilitate a public user's access to the system to be able to look at data. Again, nothing else, just look at data in the system. So the roles associated with our users, or I should say our entities, are public. I just talked about that. And that is a default role when there is no, I guess it is a default role. It's not really a role, but if you have no roles assigned to you as a user, you are considered a public user with no access to the system other than to be able to view. Then we have additional roles that are users, any LEA users that are going to prepare, review, approve, submit and publish the SACS data, and when it's ready, the alternative form, when that's ready or being worked on, then users will need one or more of the following roles to be able to work in the system. And that includes edit draft dataset, edit dataset, dataset approval, oversight, certify promote to CDE, user management, and administration. And so we'll go over those roles in a little bit more detail here in the next slides. So here, this table just gives you a little bit more information about each of those user roles. And a very summarized description of what each of those user roles will do. So, an edit draft data set and edit data set role is pretty self-explanatory. It allows the user to actually go in and edit and prepare files and data and forms within the system. A data set approval, again, pretty self-explanatory. This person or this user is going to be able to approve and promote a data set from the draft to submission area, and then from submission to oversight. And then we have an oversight role, which is this user is going to review or edit a submission for which that entity has oversight. So for example, our county office of education users that are on the external business side are going to have users set up with an oversight role so that they can go in the system and review and approve their school district SACS files. Then we have certify promote to CDE. So this is a separate role, and if anybody's familiar with or been working with PADC, they don't have a separate role. Their administrator role handles all of the certifying of the data files, but for SACS Web, we have a specific role that will be established to certify and promote unaudited actuals data to CDE. And this role will only be assigned by CDE. So if you think about our current e-transfer process, think about it similarly. You county offices provide us or set up a user at the county offices that's responsible for submitting all of the data for the LEAs within the county. So this role, a user with this role will be performing a similar function to submit the data files to CDE. And that would also be, I believe, for our county offices for which CDE has oversight. So the internal side of the house, we will have somebody that, and it's probably going to be that same person to submit the budget and interim files to CDE as well. And then we have a user management role, which basically is going to be a user that is going to manage user accounts for their associated entities. So that includes establishing user accounts, editing accounts, editing the roles, etc. So we have that. And then finally, we have an administration role, which basically is a super user for the associated, for its associated entities. So we'll have a user with an administration role at the county office level. And then there'll also be a user with an administration role at the district level. That's just the kind of the high point, or the hierarchy, top of the mountain user for each entity. But we'll go over in a little bit how those get set up. So just to dive a little further into the edit draft data set and edit data set roles. So you'll see here that a user, so in this little graphic, this gentleman who is a user at a school district, he has the edit draft data set and edit data set roles assigned to him. So this, again, this allows this user, he's going to be able to have basic data process abilities limited to draft data sets. So I mentioned this earlier, but there's going to be two separate areas within the system, which we'll be going over in a little bit. But the edit draft data set allows the user to edit the data sets that are within their draft area. This role, so someone that only has an edit draft data set role, they're only going to be able to see data sets that are in the draft state, which are, again, the draft data sets that are owned by the current user. So this person, he has his draft area, and this edit draft data set role is going to allow him to work with that data set in his draft area. Nobody else is going to be able to look at those data sets or make any changes to those data sets. But this user also has an edit data set role. So that role is assigned for data entry and allows peers to collaborate and review data sets prior to promoting to the reviewing entity. So while having an edit draft data set role allows you access to your own draft data sets, having the edit data set role allows the user to edit the data set in what we're going to call a submission area. So this is where users within the LEA are going to be able to collaborate on a data set. One person will be able to work in one form, say Form A, and you've got somebody else working in Form Cash. And I don't know if that's actually an allowable, we'll talk about this. There's some functionality related to form locking too that we won't go into a lot in depth in this session, but those access to the forms is going to be controlled by the locking feature. But anyway, this edit data set, again, basically these users with these roles are going to be collaborating and working on data sets that are in a submission area that are getting ready for eventual submission to their oversight entity. Okay, next slide, please. So dataset approval role. So this user at this district is going to be able to promote a draft dataset to submission dataset list. Again, we talked about we've got two different areas in the system: the draft area and the submission area. So a user who is working on a draft data set and has determined that that data set is the one that is going to be the data set of record, I guess we could say, and be promoted to the submission data set, which will be the data set of record to be worked on for eventual approval and submission to the oversight agency. This person is going to be the person that approves that movement. This user with this data set approval role is also going to promote a submission data set to the reviewing agency. So once that data set is all ready to go, data set approval will take a look at that file, make sure everything is in order, and then promote it to the reviewing agency. So this district would be promoting it to its county office. A dataset approval role will also be able to see all new dataset submissions within the assigned entity for review and promotion to the next level. Okay, oversight role. So we just talked about the dataset approval for the school district has determined that a data set is ready to be promoted to the oversight agency. So this oversight role, for now, we're talking specifically about a county office in this slide, but please be aware that a school district user may also have the oversight role if the school district has authorized charter schools, so district authorized charter schools. As a school district with district authorized charter schools, you are oversight for those charter schools. But in this example, we're talking specifically about a county office user with the oversight role, so that this user is going to be able to perform first and second level submission reviews for their related entities. So that would be for school districts. and charter schools and JPAs. This oversight role also has the ability to reject and return submissions to the originating LEA. They have the ability to edit data sets and also ability to publish budget and interim submissions. So there's a lot going on here with these roles. Again, this is an overview, but just to get you thinking about, you know, how you're going to, what these roles mean and which staff within your LEAs you're going to be assigning them to. Okay, so the next slide, certify promote to CDE role. So again, as I mentioned earlier, this specific role is assigned by somebody at CDE. So here's CDE over here. Our user management role, or a CDE user with that user management role is going to assign the certify promote to CDE role to a user at the County Office of Education. So with a user at the county office with the certified promote to CDE role is going to be able to submit a request for unaudited actual promoter access. This is, again, think about e-transfers. So this is what that person is going to, or that user is going to submit that request to CDE for access to be able to promote submissions to CDE. The certified promote to CDE user is also going to be able to promote or demote a submission to the following states. So promote to pending CDE authorization, demote to active submission, and demote to resubmission if rejected by CDE. So again, this is probably a little bit of a little detailed information that you will definitely become more familiar with as system implementation continues. But this is just to give you a sense of what these roles are able to accomplish. Next slide, please. Okay, user management role, we've already talked about this too. The manager of the user roles at the county office entity and or related entity. So again, user management role can be granted by CDE or another user management user within the entity. This role creates other user management accounts and grants other user roles. For example, a county office of education grants the user management role to one district user upon initial setup in the system. This role is typically held by the user with the administration role within the entity. But this role, I'll note, and I think we note it in another slide here in a minute, this role can also be assigned to other users, especially in larger entities where it would be difficult for just one user to try to maintain all the user accounts within the county, thinking about Los Angeles County for one, with all the school districts and users they'll have in the system. They may likely consider having multiple users that have the user management role. Okay, applying user roles. So we gave you an overview of the user roles and what those roles can do in the system. So now I'm going to briefly go over how we're going to get all those set up. So you're probably thinking, oh my gosh, we've got all these user roles. We've got to get our users set up. How is this all going to happen? Because this is going to be one of the first things, or actually the first thing that that the LEA users are going to want to do when the system goes live. We are not going to be able to open the system earlier to allow user accounts to get set up. So once the system goes live, this is going to be like the first activity that everybody's going to be doing. So how this whole process will start is that CDE will establish a County Office of Education user with the administration and user management roles. And we are just going to do that for one user per county office of education. Pretty straightforward. We're hoping to get that information out. We're actually going to have the county offices submit an application to us to establish that user. So that is going to start the chain of events that allow all the other users in the county and then subsequently the school districts to get established. So that once we have that county office user with the administration and user management roles, then that user at the county office will establish a user with the administration and user management roles for the following entities. So school districts, joint powers agencies, and county authorized charter schools. That will be the next step. And I might mention too that this county office user with the administration and user management role, they can also decide, which I mentioned a little while ago, to assign and set up one or more other users within the county with the administration and or user management role to facilitate getting these additional entities, users set up in the system. So once the county office is establishes the user for those entities, then the next in the chain would be school districts that have district authorized charter schools. They will establish a user at those charter schools with the administration and user management role, same exact process. So not all school districts have district authorized charter schools, so that part wouldn't apply to those school districts. So obviously, as school districts or any of the entities are thinking through this process of establishing users and the user roles associated with those users, that they're probably going to want assistance with deciding how to assign roles. We expect that county offices can be a partner with your entities, with your districts and JPAs and charter schools to assist them with the process, but CDE is not expecting the county offices to assign the roles for each LEA. Again, and that's not an expectation, but CDE is not dictating how these down chain users and roles get established. We are not going to ask you for your documentation on how you, as a county office, set up all your users at your districts. This is a local policy decision, and you should establish a policy for doing this based on your own business needs. And, obviously, for internal control purposes, you are going to want to probably have some level of control and documentation on when users are set up or when users are deactivated or their roles change, but CDE is not going to dictate that. And so that will be a local decision on how you get that, how you establish that. Okay, so once you've gone through that chain that we talked about on the previous slide, so basically at the end of that, without going any further in than getting that first administrator / user management user set up for each entity, you're going to have that user, and then that user will be responsible for establishing user accounts and assigning entities and roles to all other users within the LEA. So back to our school district example, once the county office has set up a user with the administration and user management roles for a particular district, then that district user will then establish user accounts for all the other users within that school district. And again, I want to point out that maybe that works for a small school district, having one user set up all the additional user accounts for the users within the district. But obviously we have some very big districts in the state. And at that point, this user with this initial user may decide, okay, I need to have 2 or 3 other users with the user management role that are going to help with establishing all the other users in the district and maintaining those users. And so again, that is at the discretion of that school district. Again, you probably just want to have a policy on which users are going to set up which user management role user is going to set up the other users, and the policy for doing that, and how you're going to document that. And then the oversight, so that's basically how subsequent users are going to get set up. I know we've had a question about whether CDE is going to provide a template to facilitate you setting up those setting up additional users, having a form. So CDE we are doing our best. I know that they did this with the principal apportionment data collection software. We are doing our best to get something in place that could be used for an example. We've just been prioritizing getting the system ready for you all. So we are doing our best to get some example of something out there for you that you can use. But again, CDE, any form or any examples is going to be just that, an example. CDE is not dictating how you establish your users, what kind of, assurance you want them to give you about their access to the system. That will be a local decision. CDE does not have any expectations about how you set up your local users. Okay, so then oversight entities will and I guess I'm just talking about that. So oversight entities will determine the local policies about how user roles are established. So again, so a couple tips. Obviously be thoughtful when designing the distribution of roles among users. You want to make sure you don't have any gaps. You want to make sure that you don't end up assigning all your business office people to be able to edit a data set, and then you neglected to find somebody that will be the data set approver. Because due to the workflow that has been established in the system, which we will go over in a little bit as well, you have to be sure you have a user that is assigned at least one of the roles that we've gone over earlier. Otherwise, you're going to get stuck when it comes time to move your data set through the system from, creating it, editing it, getting it approved, setting it to oversight, and eventually submitting it to CDE for unaudited actuals. You have to make sure you have all the roles assigned to at least one user. Part of this presentation we'll be going over is ideas about your organizational structure and how you might assign roles to the staff in your organization. We have some sample organizational charts that we'll go over in just a minute. So next slide, please. And also something we wanted to point out, that in the system itself, the user setup will be a 2-step process. First, the user needs to be established. So you're adding a new user. The user management role will first add the user in the system. And it's 3 basic pieces of information: first name, last name, and email entered in the required fields. I think here is a difference between the SACS Web System and the PADC application, that PADC users have to use CDE's, I think it's centralized or central authentication system to set up users. We're not using that system. So the actual process of setting up a user in the SACS web system is very straightforward. Setting up the user account first, and then that will be followed by going in and editing that user account to establish the user roles, but also the associated entities. So something we haven't really talked about much, but obviously every user, excuse me, will have their associated entity that they'll be allowed to work in the system. So if you have, you know, if you're a school district user and your associated entity is your school district, if you tried to access another, or you wouldn't be able to, you would have no access to try to edit another school district's data or data file. Obviously, we know that there are direct service districts in the state. We know that our county offices provide a lot of services or prepare the SACS data files for those direct service districts. So there is a way to assign multiple entities to one user, and that is what is going to facilitate working on data files as one user for multiple entities. We just, you know, you need to make sure you get those multiple entities assigned to you in your user account. Okay, so this is just a quick illustration. This is just a visual of where in the system you're going to do that. So we have a user's menu, and when you click there, you're going to get to this screen where you're going to view the users, and there's a little button up in the upper right-hand corner, which is where you set up a new user. And then again, very straightforward to set up a new user, just enter for first name, last name, and email address, and then click the submit button, and that user is set up in the system. So that's step one. And then step two then, which is the real important part, is in order for that user to be able to see anything or do anything in the system, again, and I'll go back, I'll just mention too that for that step one, add new user, if that's as far as you went and added a user and didn't go in and set up an entity or the user roles, and that's what you consider a public user. We don't want any public users in the account in the system right now because there's nothing for them to look at. So it's going to be important that when you set up your users, that these people are, or these users, you intend to immediately assign them roles so they can start working in the system. I think we discourage setting up placeholder users. I don't know if that would even be a thing, but when you first set up the users, because what's going to happen too is when you set up the user account, that person is going to get an email based, you know, you enter the email account. As soon as you establish the user account, that automatically triggers an email to the user with a link to go in and set up their password. And once they set up their password, then they can get in the system. And then if they go in the system and they don't have any entities or user roles assigned, they're going to get an error. So it's going to be important that once you establish your user accounts, that you do this step two and assign the user roles. So once you find that user account, you're going to edit that user's profile. You're going to click the edit entity roles. So this screen's going to come up, and this is where you're going to set up their entity and then their associated user roles. And you're going to do that. So as soon as you do that and click submit, sorry, this was awfully small. But then the important piece, which is something that I don't do this very often, but when I do it, it's easy to forget, is that once you set up the entity and user roles, you have to hit the save button, or else they won't save. And it's not it's not intuitive, but yeah, so there's Tammy. There's Tammy circling around, and this is a very important step to do. But anyway, that's basically how you get your users set up and ready in the system. And so as soon as they have their entity and user roles set up, then obviously when they log in, then they're going to see functionality. They're not that they can start, importing data files and whatnot. They're not going to get an error. So it's very important that you time this, time setting up the user account and then editing for the user role and entity, that you time it in a way so that your user doesn't try to get in the system and then gets frustrated because they get an error message. So that'll just be part of communication within your entity.
Yeah, you'll actually get a message that will say 2 red lines at the top of the screen, and instead of having an entity associated like you can see here, it'll just say guest. So if that happens to you, that's a sign that step 2 wasn't completed on your behalf.
Thanks, Tammy. Okay, so here are the sample organizational charts that I mentioned. So Tammy did an awesome job. She came up with these because of all her vast experience working in the LEA world. These org charts were developed to help you visualize how you will assign, or how you might assign your users in the system, your users and their user roles. I want to be clear that these org charts are not CDE saying this is how you should set it up. This is, again, to get you thinking about it, talking about what your own organizational structure and how you might set up your users, but it's going to be a local decision on how you ultimately do that. So in this illustration, we have a small 1,500 ADA district with a chief business official and then 3 business office staff. So obviously in this small of an organization, there is less spread of duties. And so you'll see here that the CBO may end up being the one that is, they're going to be the administrator and the user management and data set approval, and also be able to edit the data sets. They're going to wear several hats because they're a tiny entity. And then, so then the accountant, one of the business office staff, would be given edit data set roles as well as the data set approval role. Again, there's no in between fiscal director or accounting manager here that would, be the go-between and have, maybe have that data set approval role. So here we might be giving that data set approval role to our accountant, just to make sure we don't get stuck in the system while we're promoting. So, but then even though it is a tiny entity, you have 2 other staff, but maybe you don't give them access. Your accounts payable person and your payroll person, maybe they never, think about what they're doing in the current SACS desktop application. If these people aren't currently preparing any of the reports or working on the SACS data files now, then you probably aren't going to need them to work on them in the new system. So here we're saying, okay, those people don't have access. So it's basically going to be your accountant and your CBO that are going to be accessing the system. Okay, next slide. So then we have more of a medium-sized district here, and you'll see here now we've got those layers of staff in the business office. So here your assistant superintendents, they're going to have basically all those roles that we talked about before with the other CBO, but now we have a director of fiscal services in here. So that director could have the data set approval and edit data set roles. And then your lead accountant, well, they're just going to, maybe you decide, okay, they shouldn't, this is not like, what is it, internal control, separation of duties. So since we have a director of fiscal services, your lead accountant maybe should only have edit data set roles, and then your director is going to be the approver of the data files and move them through to the various levels. And then you'll see we've got, administrative assistant here. We've got, again, payroll staff and additional accounting staff, but still the same thing. You've got a lot of staff here. If these staff have never had access to the system or worked in the SACS legacy desktop application to complete anything, then really you probably aren't going to need them to be accessing the web system again. So in this example, you have 3 accountants, and so all 3 of those accountants might be given the edit data set role, but the attendance tech and your accounting techs, you may not give them access. Again, think about what your staff are doing currently. I mean, I'm hoping that that's a good, unless you're really thinking of changing things up because of the implementation of the system, just think about what your staff are currently doing with the SACS desktop application and how they're going in there and editing. And if they're working on it now, then you're probably going to want to set them up. And if they aren't, then you probably aren't going to want to set them up in the system. And then finally, a larger district, 30,000 ADA. Again, same concept here. We just have a lot more staff and a lot more staff that you're going to have to evaluate to determine which roles you give them. So again, we have a CBO who has most of the roles, data set approval, user management, admin, and edit data set. And then as we go into the next level, you've got several directors. So you're going to evaluate your directors. Some of them may not have access, and then others you're going to give you may give edit data set and data set approval. And then going down the org chart under those directors, again, we've got numerous staff, and some of them have edit data set, and some of them don't have any access at all on both sides. So again, go ahead.
In this one also, you can see we have 4 people with the data set approval access. And I just want to point out, based on some of the questions I'm reading in the Q&A, user management could be assigned to the director of fiscal and the director of accounting and payroll as well. So if you were concerned about only having that reside with the CBO who's on vacation or something like that, it's up to you to locally decide. Again, these were just to get you talking about what you would do back home. However, there's no reason why you couldn't do a user management role stacked here with the director of fiscal and with the director of accounting and payroll.
Absolutely, because I think, that's going to be key too. If not, is that balance, you want to have, you may think about having, like Tammy said, you need backups. So you're going to want to think about how many backups you want for various roles to make sure, like she said, if somebody's on vacation and you need user accounts set up or edited, you don't want your, CBO, if they're out or not available, then you don't want to be stuck waiting until they're available to make those changes. So it's always good to have backups, and that's going to be part of your evaluation. Okay, so so we talked about, a sample form. We've had this sample in our outreach presentations since, last year. It's a very basic user security role assignment request. It just has a name and the date and which roles you're going to assign to that user. That may be sufficient for you. You may want more detail. A lot of, we've talked to LEAs or talked with staff from LEAs, this may be maintained in a spreadsheet format, and you're probably going to want to do something like that for when you go in and initially establish the roles or the user accounts in the roles, to have a spreadsheet of all your users and their assigned roles and their entity assignments, just to make it simpler. But this is just a basic kind of how to, basic user assignment form. And then the next form, so this LEA role assignment verification, we talked about this too, and this is just, again, very basic, but just illustrative of that concept of making sure that for each role you have at least one person assigned. Obviously, there will be, you most likely have more staff assigned the bigger you are, but you need to make sure you have users set up with at least one user set up with all these various roles. Okay, and then, so that was basically, I know that's a lot of information about the user roles and setting up the user accounts, but hopefully that provided some clarity. So I'll just talk really quick about the draft versus submission data set type. So we've talked about this, or I've mentioned this a little bit in the prior slides. So just to solidify this concept a little bit more, data sets will be classified in the system into two different categories. There will be draft data sets, and there will be a submission data set for each entity. So your draft data sets are only visible to the originator of the data files unless you share that with others. So each user, in your draft, we call it your draft area, and Tammy will show you when she does the presentation. She'll show you how that looks and where that is. But each user is kind of like your playground. It's your own area. It's your private area. You can be modeling data, modeling in different data files. You can only have 5 files per user, but we do have the data set import and export functionality in the system, just like we do in the SACS desktop application. So you'll still be able to import and export files. So if you reach your max 5 in your draft area and you want to bring in another data set to work with, then you just need to export one of the ones that's already in your area, in your draft area. So maximum of 5, and you can just manage that using the import export functionality. So then we have the submission data set. So a submission data set is exclusive to the entity. This data set will be visible to all SACS users for the entity, provides for simultaneous collaboration on a data set. So basically what's going to happen is if you've got 5 users in your LEA that 5 users in your LEA that have all been working in their draft area, maybe it's finally decided that one of the users has the data file that is going to be the data or data set that is going to be promoted to the submission area to be the one submission of record that will be worked on. It's the formal data set that will be worked on that will ultimately result in a data submission, in an official data file. So that submission will be promoted out of the user's draft area and become this exclusive submission for the entity. And then once it's a submission data file or data set, then anybody with the correct roles, which would be edit data set and data set approval for that entity, will be able to view that data set in the submission area. Again, only one data set. We will not have more than one data set in the submission area to be worked on. And that's where you start that collaboration where somebody can be working in one form and then somebody can be working in another form. And again, there's locking rules and hierarchy to that. That we won't go over in detail in this session, but it is part of the functionality. Once that submission data set is promoted to the next level, like to oversight, that submission will be locked for edit. So if you submit, as a district, you submit or promote your data set, it's ready to go, and your data set approval person promotes it to oversight for review, you will no longer be able to make any changes. That's just, that data set will be locked down in the system. So unless the oversight role kicks it back, says it's not ready, or it's, they want you to correct something, then it's locked. It also, that data set cannot be deleted unless it's returned to a draft data set state. So that means that the state needs to be changed to draft, and it will go back to the person who originated it in their draft area, and then that user can delete the data set. Okay, so I'm done chatting. So now I'm going to turn it over to Tammy to go over the states.
Okay, so Christina has just given you a ton of information, and now I'm taking it through trying to give you all of that you've just learned in action. So there's a lot on this slide to talk about here. We're looking at, first of all, I want to bring your attention to those red vertical lines, because at any time especially once it's been in the draft data set area and it moves to submission, when it moves from, say, here 2 to 3, this is an instance where you need to have someone with that data set approval role to make it push it over this red line. So I want to be really clear about when you're thinking about designing your roles and how you will be distributing them, just to understand that if you don't have anybody with that data set approval role, it stops here. And the same thing is going to happen in other parts. And so this is the workflow. This one's a little bit complicated. We've got it coming in on the green over here from your financial system. And there's no changes to the import at all. I know Christine already mentioned that. I saw some questions in the Q&A about, what will the import capabilities change? What if we want to import maybe just a cash flow or whatever? The data elements, and this is getting into the weeds a little bit, but the data elements remain the same. So if it's something that, and CDE took this very seriously, they wanted to ensure that as the software was developed, that everything that you could do in the old system, you could do in the new system. And that's a part of that. So there's no changes on that. Importing in from your system, your financial system, it becomes coming into the draft area, and that's state number 1. So when we talk about what is a state, believe it or not, I don't even want to know the number. I think it's up to 70 or something. Some large number of states possible in the system, especially in the unaudited actuals workflow. So we start with state 1, and then once the person is complete working on it in their individual area, in their private draft area, they can flag it for pending internal review. And like I said before, this is when that person who has that data set approval role can then move it. When it crosses this red line to become state 3, this is when it's something that the team can then see. And let's talk about this for just a moment. There's 2 different approaches that could be taken here. Christine pointed this out the other day. Perhaps you do the bulk of your work if you're tiny district, you may do the bulk of your work in the draft data set area. I saw a question in the Q&A, when can you run TRCs? You could run TRCs as soon as you do the import. There's no point in time where error checks can be run that's specific at all. It's as soon as it's in the system, you can run those TRCs. And so you could do the majority of your work on your forms, your TRCs and everything, and then move it into the submission area at that point. But if you're going to be collaborating with folks and you want to say, as a team, certain folks are going to be completing different portions of this submission, that's what happens in this orange section in the middle, the submission data set area, under actually mostly happening under this number 4 state data entry. I want to be really clear about something though, that it has to do with the roles. So if you have this edit data set role, that's what you need at this point to be in state forward. You cannot say, I want Barbara to only have access to the form A, and I want Johnny to only have access to the form cash. The system doesn't provide for that type of specificity. So once you have something in the system that is in the submission area and folks have that data set, edit data set role, and it's sitting out there, they can, as long as it's not locked for whatever reason, they can go in and edit any form that's sitting out there. So we just like to make sure that that's clear to everybody. And so basically you can see here, we would follow this down. They would go from 4 to 10. They would go to the first LEA review. So if you're a district, that's your county office. And then coming over this red line again, you need to have that data set approval person again. And then the county office can click a button when oversight review is completed. And then if it's a budget or an interim, that county office would then publish. And publish is, like Christine mentioned, that's when the public users would be able to view. Now, seeing as we're releasing the software for 22-23 budget, I'm not sure that functionality will be available, but even if it was, the public users wouldn't even have access until after I think it's September 15th is the first date, right, that the county offices have to work on their budget approvals. And so for this current time, that's why as the release is being complete, the public user isn't being utilized at this time. There's just nothing out there for them to see. There were questions in the Q&A about the union access, and that the public user would be the mode for the union access in the future once that module's up and running. So that would be the access point there. And if this were to be a UA for unaudited actuals, then we would go from 10 and then over here to promote to CDE for UA, and then over here in this route. So this is a look at the states. And then this one goes into a little more detail, and it actually spells out the state numbers down the right-hand side of the slide. So it's nothing different than really what you were looking at on the other slide. We just thought it would be nice if we wrote them down. I know it's a lot to take in. We're just trying to talk about roles and understanding how it works. And now we're introducing this other concept, states, and we just wanted to brush on it really lightly here today. We really don't want you to feel like, oh my gosh, I really need to understand this all right now. That's not, this is just for an exposure so that you understand how the system is set up, and know that every possible combination of activities has been considered, talking about maybe something that was rejected, maybe a form was incomplete, or for whatever reason, maybe something wasn't correct. You can always send it back to data entry and ask whoever submitted to you to work on it some more. So that's a little bit more on the states. This is where we actually get to connect the states and the user roles so that you can see who sets the state, who can move things from one place to another, and how. So you can see here, the states are running down the left-hand side and who the user role would need to be. And again, thinking about this as you're assigning your roles, looking at these states, looking at these charts, and you sit down with your team and look at what's going to work best for you in the way that you intend to roll this out with your teams. So now we're at the point where we're going to do a system demo. Stop sharing for just a moment and clear my screen of the PowerPoint. And the first thing I want to demonstrate today, I'm going to log out of this. Okay, the first thing to demonstrate today is how to set up the users. This is one of the key components of one of the reasons why we wanted to make sure that we covered in this training today. We want to ensure that as the system goes live, everyone knows how to get in and add these users and assign these roles. Because as Christine mentioned earlier, you're going to go in and you're going to see nothing if you try to access the system and your roles haven't been assigned. So I'm going in right now and I'm going to set myself up. I'll give you a tour of the system in just a moment, but right now I just want to show you how you will set up a new user if you are user management role at either a county office or a district or a charter school that uses SACS. you're going to go to that users here at the top, and you're going to do the view users list. These are all the users that are in here now. And and again, Christine had a slide on this earlier, but I'm just showing it to you live. Add the new user right here in the upper right-hand corner. And I'm going to make one for myself. And I'm going to use my current. Email account, and then agree to the terms of service. So I've made that up here, and it created it for me. But remember what Christine said, this is step 1. We have to do step 2 now. So I'm going to come in here for step 2. I need to find that user. So here's the one that we just created. Click on that box, and I'm going to come over here and edit the user. So you can see here, no entities or roles have been assigned. So if I tried to log in with that account right now, it would say, hello guest, because I wouldn't have anything associated with my user. So again, we have to come up here to the upper right-hand corner, add entity or role. And I'm going to be, let's make me a school district. I'm going to be with, we'll do Plumas because that's who we're going to be looking at later in our demo. So Plumas Unified, so you choose wherever you are working. Of course, I'm logged into CDE, so I have access to the whole state. But if I was in here as a county office of education, I would be limited to only entities in my county. So I don't want you to think that just because it's not going to be that confusing for all of you. You will only have access to anything that's relative for you. And here, it's really important. I saw lots of questions in the chat box about, can we give administration to more than one person? Can we give user management to more than one person? Absolutely. This is your time to customize the system in the way that you would like. In fact, if I come in here right now and I could give myself all of these because I have a user management role for this LEA. I can come in here and do this. It's not going to tell me, oh, there's already someone here with user management, or, oh, there's already somebody here with administration. That's not how the system works. And just because you have administration role doesn't mean that you automatically get everything underneath it. Can't say this enough times. It's stacking. Think about stacking the roles. So if you've got administration and you want to be able to edit a data set, then you need to make sure that you have both of those roles. They don't, while they complement each other, because you have one doesn't mean you blanket have everything else. So I'm going to hit the button here that says add new. I'm going to take myself off as a self-member. This is the important part. If I scroll here, I can see here's everything I've added. It looks great, but guess what? I didn't hit save yet. So I still have to come up here and hit save. Otherwise, if I navigate off this page, I don't have access to anything. Now we know, based on this feedback from the system, that user account has been updated and it is complete. Now, in the meantime, as a user, I would have received an email. It's kind of hard to explain because I'm doing this all with myself, but if it was somebody else, they would have, as Christine mentioned earlier, they would receive an email with an invitation to set up their password. And as soon as they complete that, they will then have access to the system. So the sooner you can assign the roles to the time that you add the user, the better. Because as soon as you add the user, which was step 1, they're going to get that email. So if you want to save yourself trouble of getting emails saying, why don't I have roles? Make sure that you're doing them in succession really soon. So I'm going to switch over now and give you a tour of the system. I'm going to log out and log back in just to be sure that I'm fresh, because the system makes it look like you're in, sometimes you're not. So this is the fun part. Now we get to look more at the software. Let's see here. So the first thing I want to point out is when you log in now, it knows who you are. Remember in SACS Legacy, you had to do the preferences screen. We don't have that here. We have, I have all the entities that I'm associated with. So this actually will answer I think we had a CPA asking questions earlier. How will I be able to work with all the different entities? Or perhaps you work at a county office of education and you are performing direct service for 4 or 5 different districts in your county. Let me start with, in the case of the CPA or auditor who's working with a district, you would most likely be getting edit draft data set access and inside of one of these entities. So you could have as many of these entities. Look at how many I have a lot. It's basically, I don't think there's a limit on how many you can have access to. And you would then go in and then whatever roles that entity assigned for you. But again, if it's an auditor, we actually did confer with auditing firms as we were developing the software with the functionality of edit draft data set. You should be able to do everything that you want to assist your LEAs. And the reason why we liked the edit draft for the auditors was because it's a private area. If you don't want it to impact, like perhaps if you're doing the conversion entries at the end of the year, you don't have to actually change the district stat file if you don't want. You make a copy and you can work on it in your own draft area, and that's great. So that explains how an auditor may work. If you're at a county office, you're providing direct service, you would have the same list. You might have your county that you work for, and then you would have to register as an associated user with the different districts. So if you have 4 districts that you're helping, those 4 districts would show up in your list, and then you would have the appropriate roles under those districts there. So that's a little look at how the different roles and entities can be associated with the login. If I go in here to edit my profile, I can see here what I have. Again, I have user management roles, so I can actually edit this. But if I didn't have user management, you would not see this blue edit option here. Probably not the red one either, because you wouldn't be able to change anything. So, but you could still see your profile there. So that's the important part about this upper right-hand corner is beware of, if you have various entities, beware of who you're working with. Also, you can change your fiscal year here. This is the test environment, and it has back years because we've been in here playing with DAT files or data sets for a while, for various years, just to test the system, that when the system goes live, you will only see the current year. These other years will not be in here. So but it is important for you to just keep in your head that you want to make sure what fiscal year you're in. Yeah, and so when you first log in, it starts you off here at your dashboard. And remember, we've been talking a lot today about your draft area versus the submission area. So this is a submission area here where it says official. This is a toggle that you can move back and forth in, or I can hit this button here that says all, and I can see everything. So when I come in here, if I click on this is the CDS number. I can see here, all of these columns are telling me something about this file. So it's Plumas Unified. I can actually name it something different here if I want. This is really important right here. This is what we are calling a license plate. So this number is unique to this one data set, and every data set entered in the system will have its own unique number assigned. This is partly a way that you can, if you name something and you didn't remember or whatever, you can always recognize it by this system defined number. It also will be, I believe it will be printed on the printed forms, and it identifies that, for example, that in the legacy system, sometimes we can maybe see an MYP from a different DAT file that a criterion standards may have come from. And in this instance, this record will be printed on all the forms. So it will be a part of the whole submission. The date it was last modified, who did it, what year, what was the reporting period, and if it's been sent to the CDE yet or not. On here, this is a draft, and this is state 1. But if I wanted to send it to state 2, I could hit pending internal review right here and then hit save. And then it would be sitting there waiting for someone with data set approval to move it forward. And if it did, it would move from, once it was approved by that person, it would come out of draft and it would come over here to official. I had returned this to draft at one point, and so I put a submission note in here. If you're looking at this and you say, wow, that's a lot on my screen, I don't want to look at that, you can actually customize this. So maybe you're at a tiny and you don't care who it was assigned to. We're going to go ahead and take those off. So now I only have 13 columns here. I've customized this dashboard to show only things that I'm interested in seeing. So let's take a look at what the system looks like once we are inside a data set. And I did see a question in the Q&A about, are DAT files no more? Well, we use the word data set, but it's basically the same thing as a DAT file. It's, you know, if you were to actually export it, which you can out of the system, it's going to look exactly like the DAT files that we know and love today. So we're just using different terminology because it's all in the cloud. Now, with the new system, with the exception of if you exceeded your 5 in your draft area, there's really not a compelling reason to do a lot of exporting unless you don't trust the cloud, which I know some people that's difficult, right? All this new technology. If you really don't want to leave your things in the cloud, you're always welcome to pull them out into the export. It would be a DAT file just like you're used to seeing, and you can store them somewhere else on your computer locally. But yeah, so let's look at what we see here. When you click on a data set from the dashboard, the first place you land is the user data input review screen. This is very similar to what you're used to seeing in SACS today. It's saying right here, lock the submission to edit or save. So if I wanted to do that right now, I would come up here and hit this lock button. Now it's telling me that it's locked. Because I've locked the entire submission at this point in time, any other users with edit data set, let's see, I'm trying to think. This is in draft, but if I were in a submission area, my other peers wouldn't be able to see this. So I don't want to confuse people, but this, if I were in submission and I locked it and it was available to all, then they would not be able to do anything else in there. This is so that I can edit here. And then also the supplemental form data is here. And again, because this has 2 columns of data, I can choose either the estimated actuals or the budget data. So this is similar to what we are used to seeing in the legacy system. And we can also print from here or export to Excel from here on either one of these sets of data. So that same functionality is available from user data input review for general ledger data or for supplemental data. As I mentioned earlier, TRCs are available in every stage of the game here. So right now we've got a locked submission. It's in the draft area. So I'm the only one that can see this right now. And I can run a TRC right now. So for fun, let's go ahead and run this. Exceptions only, give you a quick glance at what it looks like when you run TRCs in the new system. So we can see here, this should look sort of familiar to you. You've got this thing at the top and the key, the legend about what these mean. The only thing that's different here is that on the import checks, you maybe scroll down on this and you would think, wow, this looks really short. There's not a lot to look at here, but there is. So when you have the ability to, I'll demonstrate this again, to pop this open and take a look at the true depth of the areas that need to be addressed in the TRCs. So each one of these I'm popping open so that you can see. So here's another one. So this one here needs some supplemental information completed. So this is how the TRCs work. And of course you can do the exporting or printing. And when we print in the system, and I'll show you on a Form 1 in a moment, it goes straight to PDF. So those of you that have had fun with the printing in the legacy system, the way this works is it doesn't go straight to a printer. It goes to a PDF and then you print the PDF. So, but it prints, it does, obviously goes very nicely into PDF, and then from there you can print or save. It's up to you. The explanations for your TRCs are accessed here. And if you had an explanation, you would come in here. Here's where you would type it. And then at the bottom here, I believe, is the save button. And then we just wrote an explanation here for this. That's not a very good explanation. However, we would not like to see that kind of, I was just doing a demonstration. So I'm going to shrink down the TRC section. We're going to dive into the forms. So under the fund forms, and we go to fund 1. And the system's a little slow. If you notice that I'm going through a VPN, and also this is just a test environment. So just know, I know this is going to bring up questions. Will the system be inundated when everybody is on here? And just know that there were requirements of the system to have functionality related to the time that it takes to process the screens. I don't remember the exact number, but that the speed was definitely a concern and a requirement of the system to function properly. It has to be quick and not make you sit and look at spinning screens all day. So just keep that in mind. So when we look at the Form 1, you can see these tabs that we're used to seeing at the bottom of the screen. They're now at the top. So if I wanted to see the restricted detail, also if this were not a budget, which it is, we would have, if it was an interim, we would see the ability to go between the unrestricted and restricted, and you would see that here. So you can see on here the column 3, you've got the unrestricted, restricted, and combined for estimated actuals and budget. And moving through here, that is what the Form 1 looks like. And all the other fund forms are sitting out here, and they all basically function the same way. Again, you have the ability to export to Excel or print from here. Go ahead and do the print so you can see a demo of what that looks like. I know you're thinking, wow, this looks really different on the screen than what we're used to, but when it actually comes out on paper or PDF, it looks very much like what you're used to seeing. There's no interest in forcing all of you to go back and retrain your boards on how to read financial statements. This should all look exactly what you're used to. Oh, here's right here, and it's very tiny for you. Here's that license plate number. I was talking about that. Identifier that's specific to this form is right here. So I'm going to go ahead and close this down and go back. So I'm going to collapse the funds and then go into the supplementals. And we'll look at a few of these just in essence of time. I'm watching the clock here. It's 10:40 and we've got about 20 minutes left. I clicked the wrong button. Here's a Form A. One thing that's nice about the system is that anywhere it expects you to respond, it's got this different, more ivory colored cell. So that is a sign to you that the system is anticipating that it's open for response. If it's gray or white, you can't change it. So this is the Form A. And if you're looking at this and you're thinking this looks really big on the screen, I know I have it blown up big so that you can see it better in a Zoom, but you wanted to see the whole thing on a screen, you can always adjust your Zoom in your browser. So remember, in the legacy system, there's that area in the bottom right-hand corner. You can change the size of the form that you see on the screen. But in this, if you want to change the size, you would come up here and change it in your browser. Here's a cash flow form. It's telling me I'm not in balance. That's nice. And how about everyone's favorite, the CEA? So you can see here, this is the section where you can do your overrides for the CEA form. And also got another area, a couple areas in here where you can enter. And so this district is coming out below the minimum. But again, if I hit print on this, it's going to look just like what you're used to seeing. So the actual, while the user interface looks different than what you're used to, the output is the same. I'll show one more. How about an MYP? So on this one, you can see the unrestricted, restricted, and then the combined here. So you would enter your data in the unrestricted and the restricted, and then that's obviously the system will be adding up for the combined. And it's not happy with me right now with all of these fatals because I haven't done any work in this MYP. So I'm going to go ahead and close the supplementals, and we're going to open up criteria and standards. And so it looks like this. It's pretty spread out compared to what you're used to seeing. You can also, like I said, I could change my resolution to assist in the ability to complete this form. Also, if someone were new and this was confusing to them, I would just mention maybe printing out the blank form so that a new person could follow along. Criteria and standards is pretty complex anyway. So, but here's the criteria and standards, what it looks like. Components of ending fund balance. I can get there. This is an improvement over what you're used to seeing in the old system. Remember, this was this tiny, tiny little area where you could choose at the top. And now there's still an area at the top that you can choose. It's bigger and you have this ability to scroll on the side. So let's just go ahead and we'll click on this one. Estimated actuals for Fund 40, it's restricted. Let's try something that's unrestricted, like Fund 14. So I'm in this Fund 14, and there's another assignment right here for 468, and maybe I want to take it away. I can come in here, take it to 0, and hit save, and then it's sitting at 0. I believe I have to hit save here again. And now we've changed that record, and now it's falling to the bottom instead of being out here as an assignment. And so this is how the new CEFB form works. Components of ending fund balance. Sorry, I don't want to use too many acronyms. So that's a great summary of the forms and other things. So there's export down here. Remember, we were talking about earlier, if you wanted to take something out of the system, either as official or unofficial, this is the same thing that you're used to seeing. I can hit export here, and that's going to prepare that file. It's just what you're used to seeing. The import here, there's 2 places. This one here would be more if you're starting from the very beginning and you're going to name the data set. But if we were back in here where we were and we do this import, it's giving us the chance to re-import into this. It already knows its budget for Plumas. It knows. So this would be like if you had to go back to your financial system and change something in your general ledger and do a re-import, you can do that from here. You would choose your system, your file from your system. And then these options are identical to what you're used to seeing today. And then you would be able to hit the import button from there. This import here, like I said, you would start from scratch. You choose a reporting period, and then on this, if it's SACS or the alternate form, and that's how this import does. Or you can do a multiple import. If you're a county office and you want to bring in a bunch of DAT files at once, you can bring in a multitude of them at once. The users list. As I understand it now, this will actually show you everyone that has access to the system statewide. So you can sort it though by your entity. So if you were at Merced County Office of Education, you could sort this by Merced County Office of Ed, and it would only show you those folks there. So there's lots of different ways that you can find, limit the number of users returned if you're doing a search through here. Queues. So queues are really important when it comes to moving your data sets through the workflow. So if I had, let's just for fun, I have this item here, Plumas Unified, it's a draft. I've locked it. Hold on a second. let me go back in and unlock this. I'm going to move something through the submission sequence just a tiny bit for you so that you can see how this will work. So I'm going to move this from draft to pending. I can do that. And so now if I come up here in my queue as data set approval role for budget, why is it not showing up in there? That should have been in there. Hold on a second.
Oh, you're on an audited act. Oh.
Pending internal review for Plumas.
Yes.
So I go to the queue for data set. Oh, LEA draft. Sorry, I was in the wrong. There it is.
There it is.
I went to the wrong one. So we're in here and we see pending internal review. I have the option as the data set approval person to either move it over to the general submission area or tell the person, no, you need to go. Based on what we just saw in this file, I would say, whoa, maybe those TRCs are crazy and we need to go do some work in that file, or your MYP is not finished or whatever. You can return it to draft. But for this purpose, I'm going to say, make it a new data set submission. And if you recall, this was sitting out in draft before. It is now gone. But if I come to official, now it's sitting here and all of my peers that have the edit data set role can access this file. So that's just a little, or it can go back now, but that's just a little piece of how the states move through the system. And so if you have the ability or you're in a queue, you can move things from one to the next. So that's the data set approval or LEA draft data set approval. If I were signed in as a county office, I could go to the oversight queue and look at budgets or interims or even unaudited actuals that were sent to me for my review. And then last but not least, we have the super cool single stream validation tool. And I saw a question in here earlier about just giving folks access to this. And, there is some validity to that question. If you have somebody that's in AP and you want them to become more familiar with the way the number sentence, as I call it, is formed, you can always give them access just to come in here to SACS to come in here and test their account code strings. Nothing wrong with that. So we're going to test the system now, and we're going to use Fund 13, Title 1, no goal, administration, teacher salaries for $100. So anyone who's ever made an account code string knows this should fail on multiple levels. And we're going to hit the validate button. And now it's telling, not only is it telling me up here in the red, but it's also highlighting these 6 areas that need to be changed to fix it. Fund resource, fund function, fund object, and function object are all wrong. Of course, I made a kind of a silly demonstration here of that, but it works just as well if you have something that's close, but just not quite right. Christine, is there anything else that I should demonstrate in the system that I've missed today?
The only thing, I think I saw a question about exporting to Excel for a form.
Sure. Let's try a fund 1. I shared my whole screen, so hopefully this will work. The numbers aren't coming in with the correct numbers, but it's the functionality is there. I'm sure there's still, remember, I'm in a test environment, so the beta environment may be doing this different. And of course, the real live system would be doing it even better. So I'm in the kind of playground area, but this is what it would look like. And I'm guessing we don't get formulas, doesn't look like it. It's just going to give you value. So that's something to keep in mind, but that's pretty typical when you do an export from software like this, that you get the values, but you don't get the formulas. That's pretty common. Any other questions?
We have a ton of questions. You all asked amazing questions. Somebody did, I think we haven't touched on this, somebody did ask about the SACS validation tables. So as I mentioned in the beginning, one of the components of the system that's integrated into SACS Web is our SACS maintenance procedures, or our SACS maintenance application, where we do generate the SACS data files. So the nice thing about SACS Web is that you will no longer have to take those files and update them in SACS Web. As we release them, they will be automatically updated in the system. But we are very aware that you all use those, or often use those files to do validations in your local systems. So we will continue to make those files downloadable from the CD on the CDE website. So that's not going to change. The only thing that's, they're going to be available on our website, but what is changing is you will no longer have to do the updates within the system when we do release new tables. So that'll be nice. Let's see, what else? There was like I said, a ton of questions, really good. I know we were still, in case anybody missed it, we are going to try to make this presentation available, just a slide deck after the webinar. And then also, if you missed it, we are going to make this webinar video available as well. I think I saw a couple questions about importing data into like cash flow or MYP. So we can't do that in the current SACS web system. And MYP and cash flow are all are optional forms. If you have your own MYP and cash formats, then you don't have to use the SACS forms. Just as within the legacy SACS software, though, we do not have functionality built in to import cache and MYP data. So you either have to manually enter it in the SACS forms in the web system, or provide your own cache and MYP forms. And Projection Pro will not import into the new SACS format. We had a question on that. Oh, another really good question. Is there a timeout for the system? Absolutely, there is a timeout. I believe, Tammy, is it a half hour? I don't think it's a half hour.
That's a really good question. I've never timed it, but I know I've been timed out lots.
Yeah, me too. And so that's something everybody needs to be very aware of, because I think, Norma, you asked that. Oh, sorry. I forgot to go back on camera. Thanks, Herminio. So yes, that is going to probably be something that trips a lot of people up when you're starting to use the system. That, yes, I think there's a half-hour timeout, and therefore you want to be very mindful of when you're working in there, especially criterion standards. I think that was what somebody specifically entered, because that or asked, because that form is time consuming. You will get a warning message. I think it gives you 5 minutes, and you can click yes to continue, but it's easy to move away from the web system and go work on or look up something else, and all of a sudden you go back and you're logged out. All you have to do is log back in. And again, I believe, I don't want to say for sure, but it appears that when you do have to log back in, the system will take you right back to where you were.
I've experienced that.
Okay, good. I have too, but I just wanted to make sure, definitely something to be mindful of. We had questions about, the formatting of the forms, how the columns are wide. There's no way you can't, well, I shouldn't say you can't, I'm not sure if you can adjust the column widths, but we are aware that some of those columns are pretty wide. So I don't think there's within the forms proper, I don't think there's any functionality to fix that. And then obviously when we're within a form, you can adjust your Zoom settings to help you navigate better, to see the forms better. But yes, we no longer have the sliding, the sliding Zoom option that we have in the current SACS
I would
software.
add though that the Zoom, the way that they built the Zoom to integrate with the screen, it's smart. So it drops things and adds things, like it does its very best to maximize the space that it's being given. I have this joke that you don't really want to try to access a Form 1 on your iPhone. Probably not going to be the best way to view it. But on a regular size screen, you can actually fool with the settings as Christine's describing in the Zoom and get it. I find that there's a specific percentage I like the best when I'm in there, and I'm sure that all of you will as well. There's going to be a sweet spot in there that it gives you enough visibility that you can see what you're doing on the screen, but don't take it as, oh my gosh, is this the only thing it can do? Make sure you go into that Zoom and get it right where you want it. Route 11, Christine, do you want to talk about?
Yes. So again, I thank you all for your questions. I know we didn't have time to get to them today, but we will be compiling some Q&As to assist with answering you if we didn't get to your question today. So yeah, Tammy, please go ahead with the training.
Okay. So I don't know what's happening there. I keep getting muted and unmuted. We're happy to share with you today these dates for these trainings. I think it's probably pretty small on your screen. I can zoom it in so that at least you can see the dates best right now on your screen. And these are county offices that have volunteered to offer a very detailed training on the system. Some of the slides that we covered today were actually snips of the actual training materials. So this would be CDE's formal materials used for training, and the counties are all going to be attending a train the trainer event, these on the screen that you can see here, and they will then be hosting these, for the most part, virtual workshops that will be available at no cost for anyone that wishes to attend. And so we're hoping that the flyers for these counties can be available for registration. Hopefully in the coming weeks. We're hoping maybe by the end of this week, but we're working with a bunch of different folks here. So we're going to do our best to make sure that they have I know they're eager to get the registrations underway. If you're not in one of these counties, perhaps if you're in the southern part of the state and the date of April 8th works great for you at San Mateo, then and it's virtual, then by all means, register. So that's the beauty of I'd probably say one of the best things about virtual is that, we were able to do this with all of these counties. They're half-day trainings, about 3.5 to 4 hours, and it should get you on your way to feeling proficient with the working your way through the new software if you can attend.
Okay, thank you, Tammy. So yes, we are at a couple minutes after 11. So again, I just want to extend my thanks to all of you for taking time to attend today. We are going to be, like I said, we will be making this video presentation available and hope to be able to get the slides in a format that we can get out to participants as well. But again, thank you, and we appreciate you taking time out of your day, and hopefully you learned something and will be well on your way to implementing the SACS system when we go live. So thank you, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day.